It's always important to note when a talking point becomes a common headline in lockstep, when repetition is supposed to demonstrate validity, when major media outlets suddenly start pushing the same line together as they're now doing after Buffalo and Uvalde. It's only in America, don't you know? It's an American plague. America is uniquely terrible. Oh, look at that foolish Ted Cruz rejecting an astute question from a reporter about how unique and terrible this American problem of mass shootings really is.
But why does this only happen in your country? I really think that's what many people around the world they cannot fathom. Why only in America? Why is this American exceptionalism so awful?
You'll notice if you read that Washington Post piece, it just accepts as a given that the premise of that reporter's question is true. Of course, I think even the reporter would acknowledge that he's exaggerating when he says only in America, as in never elsewhere. But I understand he means just more frequent in America. Great. I'm happy to take your premise. Just show me the evidence. But even if you look deep into where you usually find the relevant information in a Washington Post article, say around paragraph 20 or so, nope, no substantiation, just an acknowledgement that Sky News, the reporter's outlet, did not respond to inquiry with any comment or explanation. Whenever you see this claim, America alone in mass shootings, or America leads the world in mass shootings, whatever variation, have a scan through the story and look for the source material. In many cases, there will be none. But in cases that actually do make a citation, as far as I've seen, it is one and only one. For example, if you go to the Snopes cleanup on this Ted Cruz story, Snopes cites a 2017 study by University of Alabama professor Adam Lankford, which finds that nearly a third of mass shootings in the world are in the United States, according to data Lankford compiled from 1966 to 2012. NBC uses the same study as the basis for its headline last week. This is unthinkable abroad. How do we know? Because Adam Lankford told us. And this Lankford study has created a noticeable shift in media coverage and scrutiny of this claim. A total U-turn, actually. Back in 2015, when Obama was saying all sorts of different ways that the US was alone or at least an outlier in mass shootings internationally, the Washington Post fact-checker gave him a 2 Pinocchio rating, as in a claim with significant omissions or exaggerations, because without a consistent definition for mass shooting and reliable international data to compare, it's a claim that just wasn't verified or supported. So what changed in just 7 years since? Did the US suddenly get way more mass shooty, or did someone cook up the supposed statistical justification to back up this claim? Anytime the political claim comes first and then the evidence comes later, you can bet it's politics driving the data and not the other way around. Lankford's study was published, and then boom, all the media got in line with nearly identical headlines and stories, including the Washington Post, who has cited it since and continues making its general claim today. And now, the Obama talking point that was 2 Pinocchios just a few years ago is suddenly commonly accepted truth. So how is Lankford's study supposed verification of a pre-existing but unsubstantiated political narrative that mass shootings are a uniquely American occurrence? Well, let's have a browse through his methods. He defines a mass shooting as a shooting killing 4 or more random people or bystanders in a public space, excluding sponsored acts of terrorism or genocide, which I'm not sure why you would exclude such things. Were the Charlie Hebdo or the Bataclan theater attacks in Paris not mass shootings because they were Islamic terror? This definition could also exclude the Buffalo shooting or the Christchurch shooting, for example. These were also done with terroristic political motive, if not sponsorship. It makes no sense to categorize these events as something other than mass shootings because of their motives or support. But fine, definitions aren't always perfect. You take one and you stick with it. My examples are outside of his analysis anyway, because his data aren't that recent. Using this definition, Lankford looked through primarily NYPD, but also FBI data about US and international mass shootings, and identified 292 cases globally from 1966 to 2012. 90 of them, or 31%, were US cases, despite the US representing under 5% of the global population. Thus, this mass shooter stuff is a disproportionately American problem, Lankford concludes. Okay, fair enough. I guess that sounds plausible on paper, but just to verify, could we please see the paper to analyze it ourselves? The paper with the data, that is. This is where Lankford's analysis is first exposed as astoundingly dishonest. The reason the term study carries such prestige, the reason we're all supposed to respect and defer to what a study says, is because a study is based on data that are verifiable, with findings that are able to be replicated. A study brings the receipts. It is not supposition. It is not opinion. It is hard evidence gathered and analyzed through transparent and repeatable methods. But Lankford gave none of that. He didn't disclose his data at all. He refused requests from the Washington Post to show his data publicly. He refused requests from other academics to share his data with them. But he did give his data to the New York Times so they could make all sorts of fancy charts to pursue the agenda without actually showing any of the information from which the charts were made. Red flag number 1 is the politics leading the evidence, not the other way around. Red flag number 2 is concealing the evidence. Red flag number 3 is only sharing the evidence with friendly media outlets under an agreement that they not share it and only make propaganda out of it. Thankfully, though, there were those still willing to challenge the point and pursue the truth. One of the academics who Lankford refused to share his data with on request is a researcher named John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Center. For months, Lott asked Lankford for his data before and after publication of Lankford's paper, and Lankford refused to provide it, which is incredibly uncommon in the academic community, especially after a study's publication. Without being given the data to analyze it himself, Lott's only option was to try to recreate it. So he did. Lott adopted the same definition for mass shooting, a public fatal shooting of 4 or more random people or bystanders, except Lott included incidents identified as terrorism, though he does share results both with and without those terrorist incidents. And while those definitions do, of course, matter, Lott found that the issue is less about defining mass shooting and more about how Lankford found information on them, or rather, didn't. Remember, Lankford used NYPD and FBI data, sources he said provided, quote, complete data for mass shootings in 171 countries over 46 years. But those data sets are not complete, not just by Lott's assessment, but by the dataset's own acknowledgement. The NYPD dataset Lankford primarily used notes its own researchers, quote, limited their internet searches to English language websites, creating a strong sampling bias against international incidents. The NYPD also only did internet searches, not searches through physical news archives. So how could we rely on a data set that was built on English-only web searches and expect to capture information about a mass shooting in India in 1975, for example? We couldn't. And so unsurprisingly, by expanding the world of available information, Lott demonstrates that Lankford's data are nowhere near complete as advertised. Lott searched through the University of Maryland Global Terrorism Database for events fitting the definition. Lott hired people who speak foreign languages to conduct news searches in those languages to find any cases not captured. He narrowed the window of time, looking at 1998 to 2012 instead of 1966 to 2012. And within just those 15 years, Lott identified nearly 1,500 mass shooting cases across the world, not 292. Of those, 43 were in the United States, representing 2.9% of the cases, not 30%. That's right in line with the U.S. share of the global population, actually a little under it. And this finding is true whether you measure shootings by individual incident count or by death count, about 2.1% in that metric. And just in case you're skeptical, Lott actually released all of his data for your own evaluation. And Lott's paper isn't new. It was published 4 years ago in 2018, but media citations for Lankford continue without mentioning that pesky Lott. But Lott did get Lankford's attention, and Lankford responded with a follow-up of his own in 2019. Lott's paper was good enough to get Lankford to abandon his former dishonesty and actually release his data. However, Lankford replaced his old dishonesty with a new form, changing the definition of the term. That is the basis and the substance for Lankford's response. Well, sure, you get way more cases when you count the ones with multiple shooters, but everyone knows that mass shootings only count when it's one attacker. First of all, no, not everyone knows that. Does Columbine not count as a mass shooting because two shooters worked together? Does San Bernardino not count for the same reason? How about the French Islamic shootings that I mentioned earlier? What analytical difference does shooter count make? If you're in a mall and a crazy guy busts in and starts popping off rifle rounds and you're worried, but then his friend comes in and starts doing the same, are you supposed to be relieved because that's not technically a mass shooting anymore? Or is that actually worse? And second, to Lankford, no, not everybody knows that mass shootings are one shooter only, because you didn't define the term that way in your original paper. The paper makes no such distinction in its description of the term. And the paper explicitly references Columbine as an example of the problem. And now that he's finally shared his data, we can see the original analysis included Columbine, a mass shooting with multiple shooters. If the definition was so obvious, why did you betray that obvious definition? It's because that definition wasn't relevant then. The new definition is relevant now, not because it has any analytical basis, but just because it's needed to maintain the finding. And funny, when Lankford takes Lott's data and limits it to only cases with one shooter, he gets exactly the result that he wants. 30% of mass shootings committed by lone gunmen in the world were in the US, dismissively mocking his critics for supposedly unwittingly proving his point. The unstated acknowledgement, by the way, is that Lott's data are better. Lankford said that his prior work was done with complete data, but now he sees a data set with more data, and suddenly he relies on that to make his point. If your old work was complete, then this new work can't be right. If this new work is right, then your old work was not complete. One of the two is flawed, but of course, definitions, data to be included or excluded, these things aren't following any methodological principle. They are only following a pre-conclusion. And it's a point that shouldn't even be granted regardless, this new point that the US still leads the world in single gunman mass shootings because it obscures key limitations in the data. Lankford says when you limit to single gunmen, it all becomes clear. But you can't reliably do that given Lott's data. As is the theme with all of this analysis, quality data internationally are hard to gather. In Lott's data, the number of killers in each case is known in only 380 of the 1,400 cases. So in 3/4 of the cases, a bulk of those internationally, we just don't have the information to know how many attackers there were. So by limiting for only one shooter, are we actually filtering for lone gunmen? Or, as was Lankford's original problem, are we just filtering for higher quality US news? Of course, US shootings look like outlier problems when you filter out examples elsewhere. But even if we take Lankford's point, notice how the original claim has now shifted. It was mass shootings are a uniquely American problem. Now it's mass shootings by one gunman are a uniquely American problem, as though multiple gunmen is somehow better. And of course, there's only one thing that explains getting shot by one guy instead of multiple in America, and that is what else? The other pre-conclusion, relaxed gun laws and gun culture. By definition, Lankford writes, firearms are needed for solo attacking mass shooters to commit these acts. So countries where it's easier for these deranged, disturbed individuals to legally purchase guns will have increased likelihood of attack. This isn't rocket science. No, it isn't. It sounds much more complicated, actually. The explanation now is that relaxed gun laws enable mass shootings by solo attackers only, but strict gun laws correspond with mass shootings by multiple. Again, why would I want a mass shooting by multiple people instead of just one? How is that less of a problem? That is the rocket science that I need demonstrated. But even if you think I'm being unfair to Lankford. Even if you do think for some reason that it's way worse to get shot by one guy in America than it is to get shot by 10 guys in Mumbai, for example, which is one of the worst mass shootings ever that doesn't count for some reason by this definition, let's at least agree on the value of repeated evidence. If this conclusion that America is so unique in this mass shooting regard is so obvious, show me another study to that effect. Not 10, not 5, just one. The fact checkers have been working on that for years, and they don't have the citations. The Washington Post revisited this question in 2018 and had nothing more to cite beyond this Lankford v. Lott debate. Back when the Washington Post fact-checked Obama, they cited one other professor and researcher team who found that using data from 2000 to 2014, the U.S. had a lower rate of mass shooting deaths per capita than Norway, Finland, and Switzerland. If there are so many demonstrations of this obvious truth, the citations for them are missing. If they tell you the problem is so obvious, and it isn't, at least in their claim that it's an outlier, we should be similarly skeptical of their insistence that there's an obvious solution, too. Even Lankford himself, the academic supposedly diagnosing this problem, is openly doing it in pursuit of an agenda. He spoke with NBC News just last week saying academics abroad all ask him, this is such an obviously terrible and tragic problem with such an obvious solution. Why can't those American idiots just figure it out? Is it a lack of political will, or do Americans love their guns so much they are willing to let children die rather than give them up? No. It's because I'll protect my children with everything I have, actually, especially from liars who want them disarmed, helpless, and subjugated. I can acknowledge that a school shooting is awful, while also understanding that the supposed safety of surrendering my children to the state isn't. It's not a great track record of safety with that one either. In other words, I'd rather not create the ultimate emergency as a remedy for other ones. As John Stossel wrote on this same issue and these same studies 3 years ago, remember the wisdom of the Second Amendment. Government's desire to control us and to lie to make its case is the real emergency. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.